All right, everyone, welcome back to LA class. And today we are going to be continuing on with our story, part one of the Odyssey. And this is going to be the last section of part one of the Odyssey, entitled The Cattle of the Sun God. Remember to have open your 12 steps to the hero's journey, because we are going to be adding to that today. But first, let's talk a little bit about where we are in the world. So, in our story, we had just passed the Scylla and Charybdis sort of battle here, or Charybdis battle here, where we go through the strait, and now we've made it past both. Okay? That's where we're going to be picking up then. All right, we're on page 980 of our story, and let's continue on here. The cattle of the sun god. In the small hours of the third watch, when stars that shone out in the first dusk of evening had gone down to their setting, a giant wind blew from heaven, and clouds driven by Zeus shrouded land and sea in the night of the storm. So just as dawn with fingertips of rose touched in the windy world, we dragged our ship to cover in a grotto, a sea cave, where nymphs had chairs of rock and sanded floors. I mustered all the crew and said, "Old shipmates, our stores are in the ship's hold, food and drink. The cattle here are not for our provision, or we pay dearly for it. If you remember, when Odysseus went to the opening to the underworld, the pit of the underworld, he spoke to Tiresias, and Tiresias told him, 'Do not touch the cattle of Helios, for if you do, none of your shipmates will make it home.'" So Odysseus is making it clear here, do not eat these cattle. These cattle are specifically for Helios, and Helios alone. Do not touch them. Now, this should be a little bit like deja vu to you guys, because just like the lotus plants on the island of the lotus eaters, where he said, "Don't touch the drug," and his men touched the drug, just like when he had the bag of wind from Aeolus, and he said, "Don't touch this bag, there's no treasure in it, don't touch it," but they didn't believe him, and they opened it up anyway. Same thing's going to happen here, right? He tells them not to do it, and they're going to do it. Okay, going on. Fierce the god is who cherishes these heifers and these sheep, Helios, and no man avoids his eye. Remember, he is the god of light, so he sees all. To this, my fighters nodded yes, but now we had a month of onshore gales blowing day in, day out, south winds or south by east. As long as bread and good red wine remained, to keep the men up and appease their craving, they would not touch the cattle. But in the end, when all the barley in the ship was gone, hunger drove them to scour the wild shore for angling hooks, for fish and seafowl, whatever fell in their hands, and lean days wore their bellies thin. So there's a horrible storm that lasts, it says here, a month long, and they can't get off the island. So they're stuck there. And now all of their supplies are running out, and people are getting very hungry. The storms continued, so one day I withdrew to the interior to pray the gods in solitude for hope that one might show me some way of salvation. Slipping away, I struck across the island to a sheltered spot out on the driving gale. I washed my hands there and made supplication to the gods, who own Olympus, all the gods, but they, for answer, only closed my eyes under slow drops of sleep. So he essentially prays to the gods, but he says the gods make him fall asleep. That's always Odysseus's thought process here. Now on the shore, Eurylochus made his insidious plea. All right, now Eurylochus is his second in command here, and we'll see how he treats Odysseus. "Comrades," he said, "you've gone through everything. Listen to what I say. All deaths are hateful to us mortal wretches, but famine is the most pitiful, the worst end that a man can come to. Come, will you fight it? Come, we'll cut out the noblest of these cattle for sacrifice to the gods who own the sky. And once at home in the old country of Ithaca, if ever that day comes, we'll build a costly temple and adorn it with every beauty for the Lord of Noon. But if he flares up over his heifer's loss, wishing our ship destroyed, and if the gods make cause with him, why, then I say, better open your lungs to a big sea once for all than waste to skin and bones on a lonely island." Okay, so Eurylochus's logic here, maybe not terrible logic, but essentially is that famine or starvation is the worst way to die. So let's go kill these cattle. We'll sacrifice them to the gods who own the sky, specifically Zeus. And then once we get home to Ithaca, we will build a beautiful temple in the name of the Lord of Noon, or Helios. This is a little bit like if you're praying, right? You say, oh, if you give me this one thing, then I'll go to church every single Sunday and give all of my money to charity. I just want this one thing. That's kind of what they're trying to do here. We just want this food. If we get this food, we'll worship you forever. But he says, even if, at the end here, even if their ships are destroyed and they're killed out on the open sea, it's better to die because of drowning than it is because of famine or starvation. So even if it doesn't work, and even if the gods do punish them, it's a better punishment than starvation. So that's kind of Eurylochus' logic here. Thus Eurylochus and they murmured, aye, trooping away at once to round up heifers. Now that day tranquil cattle with broad brows were grazing near, and soon the men drew up around their chosen beasts in ceremony. They plucked the leaves that shone on a tall oak, having no barley meal, to stew the victims, performed the prayers and ritual, knifed the kine and flayed each carcass, cutting thigh bones free to wrap in double folds of fat, thus offering with strips of meat, were laid upon the fire. And then as they had no wine, they made libation with clear spring water, broiling the entrails first, and when the bones were burnt and tripe shared, they spitted the carved meat. Just then my slumber left me in a rush, my eyes opened, and I went down to the seaward path. So, typical, just as they have done the bad thing that they're not supposed to do, that's when Odysseus wakes up. No sooner had I caught sight of our black hull than savory odors of burnt fat eddied around me. Grief took hold of me, and I cried aloud, O Father Zeus, and gods in bliss forever, you made me sleep away this day of mischief. O cruel drowsing in the evil hour, here they sat, and a great work they contrived. So he's blaming the gods for putting him into a sleep while his men do a bunch of stupid stuff, essentially. Lampetia, in her long gown, meanwhile, had borne swift word to the overlord of Noon. So Lampetia is a nymph who essentially tattles on what's happened here to Helios. Interesting looking map here, similar to the one that we've been using that just kind of has the places labeled. So if you ever need that, you can go back to this. They have killed your kind. And the Lord Helios burst into angry speech amid the immortals. O Father Zeus and the gods in bliss forever, punish Odysseus' men. So overweening now that they have killed my peaceful kind, my joy at morning when I climbed the sky of stars, and evening when I bore westward from heaven. Restitution or penalty they shall pay, and pay in full, or I go down forever to light the dead men in the underworld. So Helios starts off with sort of pleading to Zeus, saying, please, Zeus, punish them for what they've done. But he ends with a threat, because he says, if you don't, I will go down forever to light the dead men in the underworld. As in, I'll take my light, sunshine, down to the underworld, right, with Hades and all of the dead to light that dark world instead of your world on Mount Olympus and all of the fields and everything of man. So this is not just a plea to Zeus, this is also a threat to Zeus. Okay, going on then. Then Zeus, who drives the storm cloud, made reply. Peace, Helios, shine on among the gods, shine over mortals in the fields of grain. Let me throw down one white-hot bolt and make splinters of their ship in the wine-dark sea. So essentially Zeus is like, yeah, okay, sure, I'd rather have sunshine than these people. I don't care about these people, so I'll just kill them. Okay, going on here, line 920. Calypso later told me of this exchange, as she declared that Hermes had told her. So remember, the reason that this is all told from Odysseus' point of view, so the only reason he knows this happens is that there's another person he's going to run into here, Calypso, who is part goddess, which we'll talk about when we get to her. She filled in Odysseus that this happened, because she does have some connection to the gods. Well, when I reached the sea cave and the ship, I faced each man and had it out. But where could any remedy be found? There was none. The silken beeves, the cows, of Helios were dead. The gods, moreover, made queer signs appear. cowhides began to crawl, and beef, both raw and roasted, lowed like kine upon the spits. So this is creepy. Essentially, the gods started messing with like reality, and so the dead bits of the cow hides and the beef and the raw and roasted pieces of the beef, they all start moving, right? So some of them start crawling off the spits they're roasting on. The cow hides that are on the ground start moving around, which would be absolutely horrifying. I always thought this is like a really scary and creepy part of the story. Now 6 full days my gallant crew could feast upon the prime rib they had marked for slaughter from Helios' herd, and Zeus, the son of Cronos, added one fine morning. All the gales had ceased, blown out, and with an offshore breeze we launched again, stepping the mast and sail to make for the open sea. So they should be suspicious of this. There's been essentially a storm there for the last month, probably caused by Poseidon, and now all of a sudden it stops, and they have a beautiful day to go out to the open sea. Okay, going on. Astern of us, the island coastline faded, and no land showed anywhere, but only sea and heaven, when Zeus, Cronan, piled a thunderhead, this means Zeus, son of Cronos, piled a thunderhead above the ship while gloom spread on the ocean. We held our course but briefly. Then the squall struck, whining to the west, with gale force, breaking both forestays, and the mast came toppling aft, along the ship's length, so the running rigging showered into the biles. So as soon as they go out, all of a sudden thunderclouds appear overhead, and then the ocean starts to get very tumultuous. So Poseidon and Zeus kind of working together here. On the afterdeck, the mast had hit the steersman a slant blow, bashing the skull and knocking him overside, as the brave soul fled the body like a diver. With a crack on crack of thunder, Zeus let fly a bolt against the ship, a direct hit, so that she bucked in reeking fumes of sulfur, and all the men were flung into the sea. They came up round the wreck, bobbing a while like petrels on the waves. No more seafaring homeward for these, no sweet day of return. The god had turned his face from them. So this line right here essentially tells us that all of Odysseus' men are now dead. All of the men who he brought over to fight in Troy for 10 years and then tried to get them home for the last, I think it's like 8 years at this point, years on the journey home, they are now dead, and Odysseus is the only one left. Reading on, line 956, I clambered fore and aft my hulk until a comber split her keel from ribs, and the big timber floated free. The mast too broke away. A backstage floated dangling from its stout rawhide rope. I used this for lashing mast and keel together. These I straddled, riding the frightful storm. So essentially, the ship broke up here into pieces, and then he took some rope and created a raft that he could at least stay afloat on using the broken pieces of the ship. Nor had I yet seen the worst of it, for now the west wind dropped and the southeast gale came on. One more twist of the knife, taking me north again, straight for Charybdis. All that night I drifted, and in the sunrise, sure enough, I lay off Scylla Mountain and Charybdis Deep. So he's back to the monsters that they made it through earlier, the Scylla and Charybdis. There, as the whirlpool drank the tide, a billow tossed me, and I sprang for the great fig tree, catching on like a bat under a bow. Nowhere had I to stand, no way of climbing, the root and bole being far below, and far above my head the branches and their leaves massed, overshadowing Charybdis pool. But I clung grimly, thinking my mast and keel would come back to the surface when she sprouted. And how long, with what desire I waited, till at the last twilight hour, when no one hears and judges pleas in the marketplace all day, between contentious men goes home to supper, the long poles at last reared from the sea. So his raft disappears under the waters because Charybdis sucked in everything. Well, he grabs onto a fig tree on the side of Scylla's mountain, essentially, and tries to wait for his raft. And he waits and waits and waits. As it says, he has a metaphor here about the marketplace, but waits and waits and waits. And then finally, he can see it. It says, "Now I let go with hands and feet, plunging straight into the foam besides the timbers, pulling astride, and rowed hard with my hands to pass by Scylla. Never could I have passed her, had not the Father of gods and men this time kept me from her eyes." So Zeus just kills all of Odysseus's men, but here Zeus helps Odysseus by protecting him from the Scylla, allowing the Scylla to not see him. "Once through the strait, 9 days I drifted in open sea before I made shore. Buoyed up by the gods, upon Ogygia island, the dangerous nymph Calypso lives and sings there in her beauty, and she received me, loved me." Yes, this is another scenario in which a very powerful woman falls completely in love with Odysseus and wants him to stay with her forever. But we'll get more of that next time. "But why tell the same tale that I told last night in hall to you and to your lady? Those adventures made a long evening, and I do not hold with tiresome repetition of a story." So remember, in the very beginning of part one, we said it's a flashback. So he's on this island talking to a king and queen. We don't exactly know who yet. And he's telling them what he's been doing since Troy. Where are your men? What's happened to you? And all of these adventures have just been Odysseus recounting what's happened to him. So now we're back kind of in real time. Okay, let's go ahead and add to our 12 steps of the hero's journey. So we're down here, and we need to add a couple things here. So first off, on Helios' island, Odysseus' men kill the sacred cows, and Zeus destroys Odysseus' ships and his men. And then Odysseus washes ashore on Calypso's island. So that's how he survives. And if we want to take a look at our map, we are now here, 14, on Calypso's island, just off the coast of Africa. All right, that's it for our video today. I'll talk to you guys next time.